Good to be here. Always good to be here, and welcome to a brand new episode of Matt's Art Chat. I'm your humble host, Matt Micucci, and this is a weekly series of podcast conversations with arts creators, curators, and lovers from all over the world. And I promise that eventually I will stop filming these introductions to the podcasts on my laptop, but between audio and video, I definitely pick audio because I feel like these podcast conversations are meant to be listened to, not really watched. But so thank you for joining me. My guest on this episode is Kristine Schomaker, who is a conceptual artist, but more specifically, she defines herself as a dedicated conceptual autobiographer. And I'd never heard of that term before, but in this conversation, she actually does provide us with a definition, a very interesting definition for what that means. And we also talk about some of her really fascinating recent art projects, and also some of the stuff that she's been working on during the pandemic. As well as that, we get into a chat about her work as an arts curator and promoter. She's totally passionate about the arts, and for me, it's truly delightful to record conversations with people who are passionate about the arts, who understand the expressive power of the arts, and who really embrace the potential that the arts has to make us feel better. Just make us feel better about ourselves and about what's going on in the world and the world around us. Especially right now, we can totally appreciate that because with all the chaos that's going on, this is a time of change. And it can be really hard to live through these moments. I know, we read about these moments all the time, but living during these times can be very, very difficult. I know because I perceive that difficulty. I can feel it. It's a difficult time for me too. But I think that if we can come out the other end, it can probably bring positive change. And that is what we definitely need. And so the arts can definitely encourage that change and can help that change, that positive change that we need. And so for me to record conversations like these and sort of maybe contribute to the current dialogue in a different way, but in a very relevant way, I feel it's just, I love doing it. And hopefully, it was definitely great to chat with Kristine, and hopefully you will enjoy listening to our conversation. So without further ado, because I talked enough already and this is enough of an introduction. So without further ado, let's get started. Enjoy. Hi, Kristine.
Hello.
It's lovely to talk with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, where are you? Where in the world are you at the moment?
I am in Los Angeles, California, just a couple miles from downtown LA.
Obviously, we're living in a crazy situation here. We got the pandemic, the coronavirus, all the chaos going on in the world. How are you managing these times? Is there how are you getting through it?
Yeah, good question. I'm very lucky. I live in an artist community called The Brewery, and even though there's about 500 creatives here, we're kind of like a family. Everybody's taking care of everybody, which is great. Of course, being in an artist community, there's a lot of people that are going to the protests and, being part of it, but it's all, peaceful. The part that they're in is, peaceful. And so we're kind of getting firsthand experience about everything that's going on from them. But as far as the pandemic, most people here have been staying inside, and we've had a great support network, on all fronts. So I've been very, very lucky being where I am. And I've been, staying safe and healthy as much as I can. So.
And are you still able to stay creative?
Yes and no. I have another art studio across the street that I brought all of my paints over here because I thought it would be easier to paint somehow. And I set everything up, and every day I look at it and I just don't have that motivation to paint. But I've been doing other things like just drawing and sketching as I've been like binge watching on Netflix, or something like that. But and the other, I also curate. So I've been curating some online exhibitions, and projects that are supporting artists and keeping artists active. So I've been creative in other ways besides actually working on my art. Although I do have this long list of ideas when I do feel motivated to get started and do.
And we're going to talk about maybe some of them as we go on. And there's a lot to talk about, but I always like to start, especially because this is the first time we talk. So I always like to know, what was it that drew you to art? Or have you always sort of dreamt of pursuing a career within the arts?
Really good question. No, I've always been drawn to art, but I didn't think about a career in art until I was in college. And, I had wanted to be an architect, which of course is an art form in itself. And, I took drafting in school and I took the math classes, but then I realized I hated math. So that wasn't going to work. But, growing up, I had always I've always been that type of person that just sees art everywhere, whether it's like driving by, in a cloud formation, or, just seeing like street art. Even when I was a kid, I remembered seeing graffiti and street art, that I would really, really pay attention to, where some people don't. But I was always looking, I've always been like one of those people that just looks and pays attention. And when I was a kid, I used to drink like Pepsi from a bottle, and there used to be they used to have a foam label on it. And I remember I must have been only like 6 or 7. And my parents used to, I used to drink soda when I was like 6 or 7 years old. But I peeled off the label and then I put it in the empty bottle and I called it pop art. And I often think about that and I'm like, where in the world did I hear that from? Because I was 6 or 7 years old and I knew about pop art, whatever that was. And so it
was sody pop art.
Yeah, exactly. So, my grandparents had Norman Rockwell coffee table books, and they had different prints on their walls that I remember looking at every time I visited. And so I think somehow it was just ingrained in me. And then, as I got older, it just kind of took off.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. A friend of mine, he's a filmmaker. His name is Mark Cousins, and he's actually written a lot about the art of looking. I think that looking could in some way be described as an art form.
Yep, exactly. And, right now and in the past, I have so many friends that are photographers that, just go out on the streets and take photos. And I love them so much because it's the same thing. That's what photography is, the art of looking also. Art in general, but photography, you capture what you're looking at. And so it kind of brings it around to see how other people are looking. And I'm always excited about that, for sure.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Actually, looking is something that we could talk about for a long, long time because that just evokes in me, just thoughts and theories about the gaze, which has been part of discussions of art history or art theory for a long time in the 20th century. I don't know if you ever think of that when you create your own art.
Absolutely. Some of my projects are exactly about that, about the male gaze in general. I'm also an art historian. I studied art history and have my degree in art history. And so, my focus is on feminism and contemporary and modern art. And so, of course, reading John Berger's Ways of Seeing was integral, in my art history education. And, a lot of my work now is about body image and my own overweight body. And so I'm always thinking about the gaze and perception and how people look at me, based on that. And I use it in my art. So it's very, very present for sure.
Yeah, and I was looking at your website and some of your works, and then I read, I think your artist statement on your website, and I was really intrigued by the term that you use. And I think you describe yourself as a dedicated conceptual autobiographer. And I just wanted to know what you meant by that term.
Well, I mean, I say that, and and I think about it, and when I talk to artists, most of our art is about ourselves anyway, like whatever medium you do. But for me, most of my art is literally about me. I have an eating disorder, and like I said, I'm overweight, and I, especially through therapy and through thinking about all this, I use art as a way to cope, as a way to educate myself, to challenge myself. And so my art practice has become all about me and talking about myself. And so, and I do it, I use many different media. I'm a multimedia artist, whether it's painting or sculpture or installation or, many different conceptual practices, whatever strikes me. My recent work that, I sent you images for, it's called My Imaginary Wall. And this actually happened during the pandemic. I sent you a drawing with the dots, my dot drawings, it was just kind of mark making. It was just something that I had to do just to distract myself while I was binge watching, like Midsummer Murders or some Pride and Prejudice or something like that on Netflix. But I didn't know what they were or what they would become. And then one day I was invited to be in an outdoor exhibition that was put on throughout Los Angeles for the whole month of through June 20th. And it just one day struck me to create this imaginary wall, and which I've been talking about through therapy, like that I have this wall built up where, like I can't exercise or I can't, stop eating this or whatever it is. And so these dots kind of became this wall. And then I'm like, oh my God, how can I manifest that into a physical way? And I ended up taking dot stickers and putting them on a glass door. And so it became this literal imaginary wall with a locked door. So, I mean, there's so many different levels to it, but it all, is about me and my life. And so that's kind of where the autobiography comes in.
But isn't it kind of frightening to do that? Like to get yourself out there like that, to put your life on display?
I've been asked that many times, and many, many people tell me how brave I am, because especially my other brand new work is where I actually invited 60 artists to paint, draw, photograph, sculpt, and videotape, and also 3D print me nude. And so many, many people have told me how brave I am. And at first I was a little shy about it and a little scared. But for me, my art practice isn't just for me. It's, especially talking about body image and my eating disorder, it's to help others. And so that fear kind of left. I mean, I realize everything I do, I mean, it is to help me, but I know somehow I'm helping others. And so I'm not afraid anymore of sharing myself. It's just a part of who I am and what I do. And of course, there's some things that I don't tell everybody, but it's just, something I have to do.
That project, was that the one that's called Perceive Me?
Yeah.
And did you feel so how long did that project take? I mean, when was the first work, and from the first to the last, basically?
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering whether you felt yourself change to that whole process.
So it started officially in August of 2018. That is when a friend of mine who, I know tons of artists, and she's an artist, and she was working on a project where she was doing portraits of artists, nude portraits. And so I think I had already done work using my nude body. And so because of that, artists started asking me to be part of their projects. And so she was drawing me, and I was standing there for 3 different sessions, 2 hours each. And we were having this great conversation about body image and ideas of perception, and just oftentimes like thinking about our own self-worth and validation, and how oftentimes we take our own self-worth from how we imagine others see us. And, every time I say that, people are like, oh my God, that is so true. And so I wanted to see myself through other people's eyes. And so she became the first official artist that was part of the project, because we kind of conceived of it together at the time. And then from that, I have a folder on my computer, because I am a curator, and of like artists that I watch, artists work that I love and that maybe I'd use someday, for shows. And so I went through that. There's like 400 or 500 artists now. I went through that to look for all my figurative artists that I really liked and admired. And so I invited them to be part of the project. And so over a year, between August 2018 and August 2019, when I met with my last artist, I met with 60 artists who, presented me in, many different ways. And then we had our first exhibition in January of 2020. It was on January 25th at California State University, Los Angeles. And there were 600 people at the opening. It was amazing. And I think about it now and I'm like, oh my God, was the coronavirus around then? I'm like, I hope I wasn't one of the ones like helping to spread it to people. But it was just, people were crying just, because they got it, they understood. And it was an amazing experience knowing that, I was able to, by sharing myself, I'm able to continue this conversation about, our self-esteem and validation and perception and body image and things like that.
Yeah, I do feel like that's something that we really, really struggle. And I often think about why that is. I struggle with it in my everyday life as well. And yeah. I can't seem to figure it out.
Exactly. And people have asked me, why don't I, talk about, men, and, I have tons of LGBTQ friends and, things like that. And for me, and I would, except for because I'm an autobiographer, I figure focusing on me because it's more personal, it does help others. And I walked into the gallery when I after the opening, and there was a man that was looking at art, and he recognized me, of course. And he had tears in his eyes, and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's so joyful too. And he just got so much out of it. And I'm like, there it is. That's why I did it. That's why I do it. And so, because it is, even though it's about me, it's universal.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's a lot of joy in there as well. I think it's very inspiring to see somebody put, themselves out there like that. I really do feel like I wouldn't be able to do it, for example, but...
Yeah, I've heard that from people too, that they're like, you're brave. Yeah. I would never be able to do that.
But how about, so another project that I found very interesting was A Comfortable Skin.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so I was in, or I am in, it's called Second Life. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a 3D online virtual world, kind of like The Sims or World of Warcraft, except for it's not a video game. So I don't know if you're familiar. You create an avatar, or, a virtual computer representation of yourself, kind of like your profile picture or something, but it's and something that everybody was doing on Facebook a week or two ago, creating their, a cartoonish representation of themselves. So in Second Life, I joined in 2006, and my avatar, her name is Gracie. She was tall, thin, blonde, very classy, very beautiful. And when I started the master's program at my college in 2008 in painting, my professor was really interested in Second Life and what I was doing there. And she wanted me to really deep dive into why my avatar was the way she looked. Why? Because I'm overweight, I'm shorter, I didn't, I don't call myself beautiful. So she really wanted me to look at that and compare myself with my avatar. And so through that process, and that's what my master's thesis was about, I started to think of like the skins that we live in, the skin that we live in, however that is. Like even our profile picture on Facebook or, selfies are like this different skin because we all like, whether it's duck lips or whether it's, we all try and make ourselves thinner by holding our phone above our heads, to look down on us so we don't have our double chin. So I started to really think about that. And I also at the time, I'm an abstract painter. And so I was trying to think about how my painting correlates with like body image and with everything else I was doing. So what I did was I uploaded my paintings into Second Life and I used my paintings as a skin on my avatar. And I mean, there's a much longer story there, but I started to think about our skin and what that means. And of course, it has much broader terms. I mean, as far as race, as, gender, I mean, all of that. And so while I was in Second Life, I was also interested in bringing the virtual, like blurring the line between the virtual and physical world. And I brought the avatar with a painted skin. I used a painting of mine as a skin on my avatar. I brought her into real life by painting mannequins in the same way. And so I did a whole series. I did 8 mannequins. And I called them a comfortable skin as a series. And then actually, I eventually ended up cutting them up and putting them into jars that either look like candy or look like this mad scientist lab. And I called it an uncomfortable skin, kind of riffing off of the idea of what is a comfortable skin. Are we comfortable in our own skin? What does that mean? And so, it goes deeper than that, but that's kind of the gist of it.
And, I'm really fascinated by the way in which you seem to be drawn to different materials and different, ways of making art too. I mean, is it also because you feel like there are things that you can achieve with certain art forms that you can't with other art forms?
Yeah, definitely. I was never a figurative person. I mean, I took, life drawing classes and life painting classes and, and I did draw before and my drawings are okay, but I never jumped into that more. And, it takes practice and experience and just doing. And I just never had the inclination to do it. Although right now I'm kind of into illustration and I'm like, could I do illustration? But, for me, I don't want to say growing up, but maybe it is growing up because of the whole pop art thing. For me, like my life in art has always been about or been, like I studied Dada and I studied pop art and I studied, conceptual art and mixed media. I mean, I'm very into modern and contemporary art and, how artists, after Duchamp, anything goes, artists, it wasn't just about painting or photography, but it was about artists using whatever material they could to communicate, to get their message out there. And so for me, once that door opened, it's like, oh my gosh, there's like tons of things I could do. And, I look at everything and I'm like, can I use that in my art? I have like this whole pile of shoeboxes and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with those? I need to do something with those. Or, I mean, I'm not a hoarder, a collector, in that way, like, a lot of artists I know, but, if there's something that I see, like, for instance, my, like for my part of my eating disorder, I was my binge food was Yogurtland. And so at Yogurtland, they have their own spoons, and I would save my spoons. And then I started to collect them, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use these in my art somehow. And then when I realized what I was going to do with them, I actually contacted Yogurtland, and they sent me like 200 or 300 more. It was great. And so, I have a whole series, like a whole a project that's called Comfort and Joy, and using Yogurtland spoons.
Is there also a thing of and when you're saying you're not collecting them, but also using things that perhaps people just don't think about as much, and maybe even just throw away and don't see the beauty in too?
Yeah. For me, I mean, I'm not an assemblage artist in that way. I do have a lot of friends who do exactly that. They see the beauty in everything. The way I use objects and I use material, it kind of has to fit my message. For instance, I have another piece called Let Me Eat Cake, which I bought like glass cake stands. And what I did was I had shredded pages from my journal in these cake stands. So there's 5 of them, and there's like these shredded papers in these cake stands, and it's on the shelf. And so, the material that I use definitely like correlates to, or its intention is about like my work or my concept. I have another newer piece called King and Queen, and I'm all about containing things too, whether it's in jars or whether it's in like the cake stands or what are they called? The kitchen, like the vacuum sealed kitchen bags that, you preserve food in. Or recently I started collecting, when you buy like a comforter or when you buy sheets, a lot of times they're in this this clear plastic bag that zips. And so I started collecting those and putting, like, I always recycle work too. I always a lot of my work from the past is no longer around except for in photos, because I've taken those pieces and put them in new pieces. And so I tend to do that a lot. And so some of my older work and like some of my Yogurtland spoons are now in these like plastic comforter bags, which again, the whole term comforter, with comfort, it's like that's part of my therapy too, is like wanting more comfort, and so there's so many different levels in that way.
So many of your works are temporary.
Yeah.
At least in the state that they're in at any given moment.
Yes, unless they sell. And then they're like,
yeah.
And then they're permanent for the collector. But if I have to store it, then it may be temporary. I have a work. It's called The Language of The Language of Things, and it's at the time I was buying like little girls' furniture, like for instance a vanity or a beauty salon, like for that little girls play with, or there was a Disney kitchen. And I was buying them because I wanted to show that young girls from an early age are taught that being pretty is most important, or being in the kitchen cooking is most important. And so I was at a thrift store, and there was this pink Corvette, that the kids ride around in. And I'm like, oh, how can I use that in my work? I was like, does it fit? Is it the right message? And as I was standing there, this little boy runs up. He was probably 4 or 5 years old. And he was so excited. He's like, a car. And like, he ran up and he wanted to get inside, and his mom comes after him, and she's like, no, that's for girls. And I was like, no. So I had to buy it. I was like, if they don't buy it, I'm going to buy it. And so I bought it, and I ended up painting it, like covering it with drips and pours the way I paint, and, calling it The Language of Things. So it's been in my studio. It's a big piece, and it's been in the middle of my studio, and I keep moving it around. And I have, like, for the last couple of years, I'm like, maybe I'll take it to like a car, I don't know what they're called, like a demolition place, and have it put in the, like, where you flatten the cars into pancakes. and do that, and then take that and put it in like one of those plastic comforter bags. That's an idea.
And speaking of just the way in which some of these things are just, we're taught from an early age, I'm really curious to know whether you remember there was a time when you realized that maybe things weren't like the way that we were taught, or shouldn't be the way that we're taught, especially in terms of these gender lines.
For me, it happened later in life. I mean, I'm 47 and I just like woke up the last like 15 or 20 years. I was an Air Force brat. And so, I grew up on an Air Force base until my parents divorced. And, and then it was like I lived in a more conservative town. And, not that I was sheltered, but I lived like I don't want to call it normal life, but a pretty I wasn't woke like I am now. When I went to college, that's when I really woke up. I started I wanted to take like the cultural, there was a cultural, not appropriation class, but it was something similar to that. And then I started taking classes on feminism, and I started learning, and I was like, oh my God, how did I not know about this stuff? And that's when my life changed and my world changed.
So it was just education. It's just the more culture we acquire, the more we realize that there may be another world beyond the world that we're aware of, or just it'll open up our eyes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Of course, there would be I know of some people that would disagree with that, in the sense that sometimes education has this tendency to actually close our eyes, and that's probably another problem. But it sounds like you had a positive experience.
Yeah. For me, education opened my mind, to other things. I mean, I still, I'm a liberal. I mean, I believe in humanity, but I grew up, like I said, an Air Force brat, which was pretty conservative. And so I'm able to look at both sides, and, I'm very proud that I'm able to do that. And I mean, most people are, but I mean, there's so much nuance in everything. Nothing is black and white. And when I took a class on contemporary art, which was all about, postmodernism, I'm like, that totally blew me away. We were talking about, ideas of black and white and what that meant. And, the idea of there's a man and a woman. And, up until then, I don't know, I just wasn't conscious that there was nuance in between. And I'm like, oh my God. Those are the two extremes, but those are not, that's not it. There's much more in between. And I just wish more people could see that, and as we're seeing now, people are stuck in their old ways, which is really hard to break through.
But I think the key word there, I don't know if you agree, is empathy.
Yeah.
Especially now. I mean, it's just, we see the consequences of not being able to understand other people's pain.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I also wanted to talk about, because you seem very passionate about the arts, and you're also a promoter in a way of the arts, because you founded Shoebox PR and are the publisher of Art and Cake.
Yeah.
So you're very much involved in the promotion of works by other artists as well.
Yeah. When I had a solo show of my own work in 2012, and it was cutting edge. It was using Second Life, and I turned a gallery into a 1920s dining room, and we had this virtual dinner, or a dinner party performance with our avatars in Second Life. And I didn't do any press for it. I didn't really know what I needed to do. And I should have. I mean, it was, like I said, cutting edge. And so after that, I started researching, the business of art and what artists needed to do today to get ahead, to move their career forward, using social media, using email lists, using, going out to shows. And so I helped a friend with his exhibition, and that was kind of when Shoebox started. And at the time I was working in an emergency room. So most of my life I was in the medical field. And when I started Shoebox PR, and it became, and it's 6 years old now, and it turned from helping artists promote their work to now we're more of a support network for artists. We find resources and tools to help artists like with whatever they need to reach their goals, whatever those are. And especially right now with with coronavirus, artists need our support more than ever. And so we're able to we're having meetups every 2 weeks. I do critique groups with artists, and I've been inviting art professionals to come and talk to my artists, and we've been doing more support on social media. And so it's I love being part of the art community, and I love to be able to to support artists however they need. I'm very lucky to have both the right and left brain mentality. I've worked at administration so much that I'm able to bring that to my artists. And then because I also have my art history degree, I started Art and Cake, which is an online art magazine where I was paying writers to review exhibitions, and we do artist profiles. And it's, again, all about supporting artists, and especially focused on underrepresented artists, including artists of color and LGBTQ artists, alternative spaces, galleries that aren't the top 1% of galleries. And so I'm happy to be able to support in that way. And then I also curate shows. And during the coronavirus, I started a project called Call and Response. And on round 4, and what I did was artists submitted their name, and I paired artists together who didn't know each other before. And they would have to create work as a call and response over 2 weeks. And then I put it as an online exhibition on Shoebox PR. And so it's been really successful.
Would you say that, I don't know, there are issues within the art world in terms of maybe people connecting with each other? Maybe, like you mentioned, some disparities of sort.
That's a really good question. Nowadays, I don't think there is that as much trouble with artists connecting because of social media. Facebook is an amazing community for artists. There are so many different groups for artists that they can join, and even internationally. I've met artists living all over the world, and it's really cool to see. And then you have your regional groups, like Los Angeles, contemporary art scene, or I know there's New York groups. Plus, there's a lot of organizations out there. We have Los Angeles Art Association here, or Southern California, Women's Caucus for the Arts, which is national. There's the New York Foundation for the Arts. And there's so many different groups that are about cultivating community that I think artists are finding community however they can, whether that's a group that they're part of, whether it's a watercolor group or a drawing group or a feminist group, or so I think artists are finding community that way today more than ever before. I think our art world, I think, and I'm hoping when it's written about in the art history books, this time will be focused on community.
Kristine, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It was so great to talk to you.